The wind does not whistle here. It rubs against the slope like rough skin on glass, leaving invisible scratches on every gust. The snow crumbs rustle like fine glass under a shoe, and the far ridge, a black shimmering saw, cuts the moon into thin, faded plates. In this silence, everything that lives thanks to stubbornness. Dwarf pines, bad weather, people who get on skis and go into the white void, as if the white emptiness is also a road. 9 such people once set up a tent on the slope, stretched out the tripwires, straightened the canopy, and did what all experienced people do. They pulled the wind on the pegs and drowned out the night with conversations, a bowler hat, frost on their sleeves. They knew that snow was a treacherous thing, but snow in the north was like a familiar interlocutor. If you listen, it warns. That evening the snow was silent. The tent was breathing. On the exhale, the fabric crunches. On the inhale, the rack bends. Inside, there's the warmth of bodies, the lamp, the tiny tobacco spark in the crack, the smell of boiled, eternally undercooked dinner. Jokes where everyone knows how the other responds. Because friendship is predictability in a world where nothing can be predicted. They packed their things so that the morning began without fuss. Shoes at the entrance, skis under the floor, jackets over their feet, like thin shields from the icy breath of the slope. Their breath hung in thin clouds on the inner dome, and the drops from these clouds slowly gathered at the seams. The dew in winter, a strange little rain of warmth. Night does not come here in one movement, it crawls. At first, it exhausts the eyes with gray light, then extinguishes it to blue. Then treads of black stones cut through in the blue, and by the sound it is easy to understand where the slope is a little steeper, where it is gentle, where the wind flows around the hill, and where it stumbles over something invisible and makes a sound similar to the lone note of a cello. This sound is able to settle in the head and live there like a vagabond without an address. Sometimes it looks like a distant plain that doesn't exist. Sometimes it is on the choir standing behind the ridge. Sometimes it is on the breath of someone who decided to be here with you and with the wind that night. They did not fall asleep all at once. Someone else shifted mittens. Someone whispered laughter. Someone looked into the fabric near the very face, where the moonlight made the canvas milky and the shadows of stretch marks floated on the milk like dark veins. One of them listened and heard something heavy sit on the roof of the tent. Not a beast. The beast would have left a rustle of paws. Not a man would leave words. It was snowing. He doesn't fall. He sits down, like a tired traveler to a shop, and the shop barely moans. The stand of the far end kicked the ground a little harder than usual. The canopy stretched and did not come back, and everyone who did not sleep had a short, thin string hanging in his chest. It vibrates when the satellite squints at the ceiling and waits for what will happen next. And then there was silence, and the breath of 9 merges with the breath of the tissue. The wind pushed a new layer. Snow sometimes stacks up in layers, like the pages of a book that someone read too quickly. And if you squeeze the book, the sheets will bend, and in some places they will crack. Inside the tent, the crack was like the sound of a distant blow on the ice. At first incomprehensible, then very close. The blow came from the outside, but resonated from within. Someone swore, someone sat down, someone instinctively pressed a sleeping bag to their stomach like a shield. The canopy has caved in, not catastrophically, not in such a way as to bury everyone, but enough to understand that the seconds are running out. Everything that people build in the mountains is done because there is no time, and because in the cold, time turns into hands. The knife inside the tent does not look like a weapon. It is similar to the cancel button. The point entered the fabric almost without resistance, like dense snow. The fabric sighed and blossomed in a crack. The air trapped under the dome rushed out. The canopy became a door that had not existed before. Through this door they went out, not because they liked drama, but because the narrow strings of an ordinary entrance and a handful of seconds might be the price that the night had already demanded. Someone threw his jacket over his shoulder and missed his sleeve. Someone walked in socks because it hurt barefoot, and seconds were more expensive. The tracks they left went down the slope in a chain of 9, and it would be strange otherwise. They carry each other with their eyes, test the strength in the streams, stay close together so that the white plane does not cut them into 9 separate stories. The forest retreats to the last. In front of the edge, there is a hollow, where it is quieter, where the snow lies softly and ankle-high, but the wind weakens, and for the first time in an hour, you can hear your own blood. There, in the darkness, they found a cedar, a tree whose branches stretch upwards like fingers that want to grasp the sky. Fire is held on such branches. It sucks out the flame from the resin like milk. Fire lives as long as it is fed. To feed, you need to see. To see, you need to climb higher. And here someone climbs the cedar, breaks twigs, leaves traces of palms and knees on the bark, and tiny drops of molten snow freeze on your hands like glass wounds. Below, the fire starts as best it can, small, with red eyes, which deliberately do not blink. They sit near the fire, so close that the smoke becomes part of the tongue. Lips, which even today laughed at a simple joke, now whisper dry words. There is more firewood. You'll go. You will come back. The slope above is as dark as a curtain, and in this darkness you can sometimes see movement. Not people, not animals, not snow. Memory flickers. The memory of the tent, where you can still pick up the boots, of spare mittens, of the fact that the rope is under the knife, and the knife is also there because the second one remained in the fabric. To stay here is to become part of the cold. To get up means to return to the same cold, but to find in it the same self as before, with shoes and a jacket. 2 leave, then 3 more. The way back on the tracks looks like a thin line on white marble in the snow. But white marble sometimes jokes, it moves. Snow sleeps almost without a body, but sometimes it wakes up, and then a stone, ice slope, fragile canopy, an inconspicuous edge of the hollow wake up at once. Where it is empty under the foot, the earth knows it in advance, and only man does not. In the ravine, hidden by an even cover, lies darkness denser than in the air, as if the night had a second night, a spare. People who walk by touch fall into it with all their weight, not down but deep. The snow folds like a lid. The ribs recognize a force that they are not usually aware of. The air flies out of your chest so sharply that for a second, it seems that you have become lighter. Lightness is one of the cruel tricks of cold. It comes when you no longer belong to yourself. But while you belong, you call, and the voice goes into the cotton wall. From the cedar, the flame learns to breathe. The smoke licks his face softly, trying to warm his thoughts with thin tongues. Leather becomes wooden, and wood becomes leather. Those who remain by the fire give those who are nearby everything that can warm. Pieces of clothing, mittens, fabric that still keeps someone warm. Warmth passes like a word in a dark room. You can't see it, you can only feel it when it reaches you. But sometimes the word stammers. The wind, which used to be the background, is now the director. He changes direction, and the fire sluggishly agrees, nodding its tongues where is ordered, and for a second it seems that if you turn the night over, then there will be day below. Those who have gone to the tent get up slowly. The slope above seems longer than before, as if the mountain, while they were below, had drawn steps for itself. On these steps, the creak of snow turns into short music, where each note is a step, and between the notes there is a silence, too long for a man and too short for a mountain. They reach almost to the line from where you can see the silhouette of a tent in the moonlight haze. Not a house, not a shelter, but a sign like a dash on paper. And this sign draws to itself. But the closer, the more clearly you can hear how the emptiness inside a person knocks where the force should knock. The void also knows how to knock, dully, neatly, as if it were checking the walls. None of them thought about the legend. Legends grow later, in warm kitchens, in the words of those who love the unknown more than the known. Everything is simple here. The night, the slope, the fabric, the footprints, the warm things there and the cold ones here, and the time that rubs against people in the same way that the wind rubs against the slope. They move the way anyone who wants to survive moves, in a straight line if possible, and in a zigzag if they have to. Breathing removes small ice flows from the eyelashes and immediately hangs them back. At some point, one of them raises his head and catches a strange, barely audible rustle on his cheek. It's not snow. It's a silence that changes shape. Silence can be difficult. She rests on her shoulders and pulls down like a wet jacket. It knows how to be in order. Sometimes she says, "Sit down." Sometimes, "Lie down." Sometimes it is no more. But there is often another person next to the person, and then the silence breaks in half like a cloth, and a voice enters the gap. "Get up. A little more. If we get there, that's all." And they go as long as they can. And when they can't, they stay where they left off. Snow remembers those who have sat down. Ice remembers those who lie down. The wind remembers everyone. The cedar tree is running out of firewood. The bark in a handful crumbles into your fingers like old paper. The flame is attentive and small again, like a mouse. If you listen, you can hear how somewhere far away, behind a ridge, an ice crust breaks off a branch, a fragile, almost glassy ringing. No one raises their heads. They look at the fire as they look at the clock when they are late, and there is more request than hope in the look itself. And from above, the slope continues to live its slow life, where the rhythms are longer than human ones. The emptiness there is not frightening. There she is in order. When dawn comes to the north, he does not paint. He first lightens the shadows, as if erasing them with a soft eraser, then subtly draws the horizon line, then only adds a hint of yellowness in the distant air. At such a dawn, it is easy to believe that the night will correct its mistakes. But the night has an unchanging memory. People who come to look will first see snow, then tiny islands of color, a piece of cloth, a dark spot of a fire, a strip of wood, broken branches, and then they will see what they were looking for. And the snow will tell them the story as best it can. In short, jerky phrases of footprints spread out at different distances, ordered and chaotic at the same time. He will show them a line down to the forest, where the tracks are first sure, then torn, then disappear under the thin, fresh crust. He will lead them to the cedar, where the fire managed to eat only what was put in it and did not get to what it wanted. People who find the camp will whisper that someone's slumber lives inside the place, and it cannot be woken up. They will understand that the fabric is cut from the inside, along the edge, almost unevenly, as they cut by hand when there is no choice. They will see the shoes that were supposed to go along with those footprints and did not go. They will see jackets that did not have time to become someone's shields. They will listen to the silence, and it will seem to them that it is still changing shape, as if the hill is whispering words that do not reach their ears. And from this whisper, there is the same frost on the skin that was on the tent. And everything that can be said then will sound too loud. Therefore, they will be silent. Words will appear later. Words are loved late. They will come in the form of versions and disputes, in the form of maps, arrows, timelines, blackened photographs, and neat reports with stamps. Words will offer their own. Somewhere a snow slab, somewhere a gust, somewhere a dark case, somewhere someone else's hand. Every word has a listener, but the slope on which the silent tent stands and the forest in which the fire burned out will not remember these words. They will remember how the night moved and the people moved too, how the fabric became a door, as the tracks laid down to the forest, how fire shared the heat. Like snow, it accepted those who wanted to go back to where the shoes are, where the knife is, where the order of things, which we call salvation, although this is only order. Perhaps the most terrible thing in this story is not what happened, but how it happened. Without an evil face, without a deliberate dramatic mask. An accident that was formed from the right skills in the wrong moment. An experience that has hit the limits of human speed. A wind that became fate for a second. And the knife that did what was asked of him cut the fabric so that there was a way out. Sometimes the exit is not a door to warmth. Sometimes it's just another step into a night where you still have a chance. They went where chance flickered. Each carried away a small light, and these lights moved along the slope like tiny comets, invisible to anyone but the mountain itself. In warm houses, they like to say that the mountains are taken away. But sometimes mountains are the only ones who remember. They remember 9 small lights coming out of the tent because the exit was where it had to be made. They remember how the snow fell as a second night shadow, how the forest wisely received the tired and gave him the flame for a short time. As dawn, he carefully ran his finger along the slope and showed those who came a path of footprints. And how to go on. People took history and went with it to cities, to words, to legends, to questions that do not end. If you stand on that slope for a long time, listening to how the wind rubs against the crust of the flooring, you can hear how a dull, almost inaudible shot rises from under the snow. Not terrible, not evil. This is the heart of the place. It knocks for those who lie below, and for those who found them, and for those who will ask later, why they cut them, why they came out, who called them that night. The heart of the place responds slowly and equally to everyone, because sometimes you have to go out, because sometimes you have a door that you don't have has to make yourself, because sometimes chance lies where it's coldest, and even if you don't have time to catch up with him, you will at least know where you ran. And if they imagine for a second that the fabric of the tent is still alive, that its fibers remember the warmth of the palm, the sharp push of the blade, then perhaps they remember something else. How the little finger of this hand trembled, not from fear, but from speed. The hand that cut it did it for the sake of life. This is the main thing that remains after all the words. In the white plain, where footprints are erased in an hour, where even a cry becomes icy dust, there may not be much left. But this meaning remains. And maybe that's why in every gust of wind on this ridge there's not a whistle, but a friction, as if someone is trying again and again to feel for that very lightning door in the night and open it so that the chance flickers a little longer. The slope is getting darker again. The forest again collects the smoke into a black bundle and releases it into the sky. The silence changes shape and becomes like a whisper. This whisper has no words, but there's a rhythm slow, like a step in loose snow, and stubborn, like a decision to walk. And if you look at the white field until the ripples in your eyes, at some point, it seems that where there was once a 9, the snow still retains tiny irregularities, like the letters of a long erased letter. And this letter is not about fear. It is about choice, about how a knife becomes a door, about how fire divides heat, about how people try to be faster than the night, and about how the mountains, which have a long memory, carefully repeat this story to everyone who asks, just enough to preserve the main thing in it. Sometimes it seems that the night on this ridge does not end at all. It just changes the mask. The blue steel velvet is pulled together to a thin film, and a cold light shines through it, as if someone were slowly bringing a lamp to a frozen glass. In such a half-light, any traces seem fresh, even if they were touched only by the wind. And if you walk along the slope, slowly, stepping in such a way as not to break the silence, at some point you begin to distinguish in white not just the depressions from the legs, but the intonation of these steps. There are steps taken with confidence. They're a little deeper where the knee is leaning forward. There are steps where a person has already saved breath. The footprint is imprinted wider, as if the foot was looking for support for a second. And there are those where the snow itself seemed to want to help. It moved, substituted a solid layer, withstood, and the person moved on. In the lower part of the slope, the snow is rarely virgin, is cut by twigs, stirred by tiny animals, chopped by the wind invisible to the eye, leaving thin, barely distinguishable furrows on the surface, like scratches on an old plate. These furrows both lull and disturb. It is easy to stumble over them, to see something that is not there, not because you want to, but because you're tired. If you listen to yourself, you catch the familiar. The brain, which is running out of fuel, completes the road itself. The same is true here. Those who were walking back to the tent may have thought that the slope had memorized their route and was ready to return it like a tape in a turntable. Just press a button and rewind. But the snow edits in its own way. He cuts out the excess, leaving only the breath. In the forest, where the fire beat like a tiny heart at the roots of the cedar, the warmth gained from the night spread in circles like ripples on water. In these circles, the warmth was real only for a moment, and then it became a memory. Memories are a strange kind of fuel. They're enough to raise your hand, break a thin, dry twig, move another piece of life to the fire, but not always enough to get up. Those who sat closest to the flames saw the world as if through amber. Everything around was drowned in translucent golden, and faces were in crimson reflections, and on these faces one could read not despair, but labor. Tired, stubborn work is to keep the fire going. Cedar stands for centuries because it knows how to endure. He tolerates snow when he puts cold palms directly on his shoulders. He endures the wind when he tears his green hairs like an evil child. He tolerates people when they need height. And that night he endured hands grasping the bark, endured heels resting on the trunk, endured the thin, breaking crunch of branches that would go into the fire. At a height of several human heights, the throat of the air was clearer. From there you could look at the slope, try to wait for the signal, the dark ribbon of the tent shining in the moonlight like the back of a fish. But the night held the curtain tight, and the one who climbed understood. Hope is also warmth. You can throw it into the fire, and it will take off for a second, become higher, more sonorous. But then you will need something else. In the ravine, under a layer of snow, the darkness was as dense as cotton wool in an old medicine cabinet. There the sound is different, dull. as if each note is wrapped in gauze. If you put your ear to the snow, sometimes you can hear the earth breathing. This is not mysticism. Somewhere deeper water flows. Somewhere micro layers of ice shrink and straighten. Somewhere tree roots creak so quietly that even mice do not always hear it. But a person in this cotton silence might have wondered, and for good reason, that the slope itself says, quiet. And the man who was accustomed to obey the mountains obeyed. And he lay down, and the snow, polite to the point of cruelty, covered him in the same way as it covers stones, neatly. Searching is always like collecting a broken mirror. Each fragment shines in its own way. Here is a trace below. Here is a cliff line. Here is a cinder of a branch, which is not completely blackened. To collect them means to accept that the reflection will still be cracked. Anyone who sees a fabric cut from the inside for the first time may experience a strange relief, a solution that fits in a gesture. There is no evil secret in this gesture. The knife cuts the fabric because the fabric prevents you from coming out. Sometimes the only way to save life is to tear up what you yourself have just knitted. In the mountains, this is often not a treacherous move, but a right one. Then the questions begin, those that people are used to asking at night, as if she knows how to answer other than with the wind. Why on the slope? Because up there, the wind keeps less snow under the crowns than in the forest. There's less risk, less mustiness in the tent, a smoother platform under the skis. Why didn't you have time to return? Because the time in the cold is shorter. It shrinks like ice on a branch, and when it breaks, it cracks shorter too, for a fraction of a second, which is not enough for the string to find a hole. Why did you go out at night? Because at night, sometimes everything is decided by seconds, and during the day, everything is decided by minutes, and at night the seconds are louder. There are fears that come from outside. A beast, a stranger, fire, noise. And there are those that rise from within. Silence in which you no longer have words. Fatigue in which you have nothing to explain to yourself the next step. Warmth that suddenly turned into cold and took you as its own. These inner fears in the mountains are not called by name. They are recognized by feelings. Biting my lip means it's still here, still in the body. If you don't feel your fingers, it means it's time to reach for someone's hand. If you pull it, you get a weak squeeze in response, so it's the two of you. Together, you cannot name fears, but take a step. Time sometimes likes to get stuck in the valley, like a seed between your teeth. The morning, which finally opens, does not come out immediately. At first, the sky turns white like linen on a rope. Then a crunch is quietly turned on, a sound that is born with every step of a person, with every movement of a branch, with every heavy sigh of a tree. And by this crunch, those who seek go out to the tent, then to the tracks, then to the forest, and further to where the snow hides more than it shows. At such morning moments, the world is especially disciplined. Every rustle in the ranks, every spot in its time, every glance is on point. And yet above all this, there is a silent question, as if over an empty stage. Where is the end? But this story does not have an end that would suit everyone. There are only borders. The slope is here, the forest is there, the ravine is lower, and between them are the trajectories of people. In each trajectory, there are small victories. He climbed 2 steps higher, dragged a branch, made a fire, gave away mittens, found a direction. In each case, there was a defeat. He slowed down, sat down, did not get up, did not find, did not have time. And all this together is work. It's not a myth, it's not a sign, it's not someone else's will. The work that people do, trying to be faster than the wind. And this is perhaps more terrible than any legend. To know that the night has no intentions, and the outcome is decided anyway, as if it had intentions. In the evening, if you linger in these places, the light will begin to fade again. At first, the forest will become a dark spot, not black but dense. Then the slope will abruptly remove the remaining heat from the air, and the sound will become glassy again. And you can imagine how, in the same sound, someone once put skis across, marking the threshold near the tent. How he pulled stretches so that the canopy did not play with a flag. How he checked the rack with his palm, where the fabric was knocking, whether it was too much. How he hung his clothes higher so that dampness would not drag. How he whispered something almost ridiculous to drive the tension from his shoulders. There was more protection in these simple movements than in legends, because protection is always the work of hands. And if you stand and listen for a very long time, at some point you will feel that the nights are not hunted here. They unfold like large, heavy cards that have the same pattern of fields, forests, and slopes. And each time a person who comes with a small fire tries to put his tiny mark on top of this huge pattern. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But each such attempt makes the pattern a little more complicated. And perhaps that is why, years later, people come to this place not for a clue, but for attention. To put another point on the map, a memory point. Because memory is the form of warmth that winter does not know how to take away. There's a phrase that the mountains seem to say to anyone who asks too many whys, look. And when you look, not with your eyes, but quietly, you understand that the answer to the uncomfortable question about the cut fabric, about barefoot footprints, about the fire at the cedar, about the silence in the ravine, is not in a secret guest and not in a forbidden force. The answer is in how quickly the night knows how to change the rules and how quickly a person responds to it. And the fact that the door is cut out where there is none. The fact is that the fire is made where it is immediately extinguished, but it is still made. And the fact that they walk when it seems that it is safer to stand. And the fact that, to the last, people remain human to each other. And if you try to imagine for a minute the last words that could have sounded that night, they will not be loud. No screams, no curses. Only very simple, hold on, one more step. Take it, carry it. Sometimes the quietest words do the most. They're not for history, not for legends. They are for a couple more seconds, the very ones that were so lacking to last. And perhaps this is the most terrible truth of this story. Fear is not in the unknown, but in the known. In the way time has weight, and how, under this weight, people still pull each other forward as long as possible. The night stretches again like a long thread, and the wind rubs against the slope again, leaving fresh scratches on top of the old ones. And if others come here tomorrow, they will hear the same sound, see the same light, touch the same crumpled fabric in the photos, and say the same words. But between the sound and the word, this slope will always have a narrow strip of silence, the same one that once entered a knife to make the fabric become a door. And probably as long as this streak of silence exists, history will repeat itself, not by events, but by choices. With the choice to open, the choice is to leave, a choice to go. Even if the snow has already begun its slow, polite, cruel cover. In the twilight, which here comes faster than thought, the whisper of snow becomes more audible than any narrator. It seems that there's a tiny bell hidden in every grain of it. And when you step, these bells ring so softly that the sound has to crawl through the skin instead of through the air. By this quiet ringing, you could distinguish distances. According to him, there are years, Other people's steps, long gone, but still leaving invisible depressions in the nasty. And when the night finally pulls the sky down like a lid on a box, it is as if there's only one eye at this slope, the moon, and it looks sternly, without blinking, like an inspector. There is no writing off, no suggestion, no shortcut. Here you can only walk while you are walking and share the heat while it is divided. Sometimes it seems that one of them could have heard how below, in the narrow intestine of the ravine, the snow lay on the snow with heavy but caring precision, how they cover a sleeper so that he does not freeze. Snow can be kind and terrible at the same time. It knows how to store, and it also knows how to hide. He stores things better than people. He remembers the pattern of the fabric, the shape of the pocket, the bitterness of smoke absorbed into the sleeves. And he hides in a way that a person does not know how to do, without malicious intent, but without the right to vote. And yet, if you put your palm to the crust, even through a glove, you can feel something like a pulse. Maybe it's just the warmth of your own palm sent back like an echo. But if you allow yourself a second of faith, you can decide. The slope answers. Those who came later with lanterns and probes were not mystery hunters. They were looking for people. They had other rituals, short commands, a space step, a gaze that noted the little things, and a memory trained not to forget those little things. They spoke quietly, not because they were afraid to frighten the legend, but because they respected this silence. It is here like the law. They saw what anyone looking for the right thing should see. How a cut along the edge of the fabric turns a tight canopy into an exit. How the shoes left in the tent tell that there was no time for laces. As the footprints that jerk downwards become wider as they move away, it means that they were already walking in heavy air, where oxygen counts. Like a cedar, the breakage of branches stretches to the height of several heights, to gain visibility, to get firewood, to gain at least some. Advantage in a place where an advantage is a rare thing. In such stories, the wrong question is always asked, as if the night knows how to sign its actions, as if the wind leaves a business card under a stone, as if the snow knows someone's name and can pronounce it. But here another question worked better. How? How did the knife enter the fabric? Quickly. How did you make your choice? Instantly. How did the legs find the slope? From memory, from the common memory that people have in a group when one names a direction and the others confirm it silently. How did the fire hold up in the wind? On anger, on that stubborn, quiet anger that is called the will to live. How did the fire give way? Exactly when they stopped feeding because their hands were cold. And maybe there's another question, almost unbearable. When exactly did the chance change to a try? When is an attempt to fight? When is the struggle to transfer heat to those who are nearby? And at what point was this transmission the last thing that can really be done in the night? The slopes have no answer. But you can guess. The wind comes very quietly, like a thin crack in the ice, which can only be heard by the ear leaning against the water. Wind is not loud. It doesn't look like a movie. It doesn't look like a scream. It doesn't look like a blow. It is similar to a pause between inhalation and exhalation, the one where a person imperceptibly decides what will happen next. If you try to read snow like a book, then the chapters in it are short. Exit, descent, forest, fire, return, fall, silence. Between them are faded fields where you can enter versions. But there are always more fields for versions than letters of facts. That is why people are drawn here again and again. Some with a tape measure and a compass, some with a dictionary of signs, some with a voice that loves whispers. They are all united by the same need to put an end to it. But snow does not like dots. Snow loves ellipses. He always leaves room for another step, even if this step is no longer based on the crust, but from memory. And so everyone who comes adds their own ellipsis until the whole slope turns into a dotted line of questions. Years later, the same wind that once rubs against the slope stirs the tops of the trees and teases the bark on the stones, passes by the tent in an old photograph in someone's hands. There, on the smooth paper, the fabric is still silent as it was then. The incision on it is not a wound, but a decision frozen in the material. This is the only thing in this story that can be called without a doubt correct, because being right sometimes means being instantaneous, and because in some conditions, responsibility is speed. Where seconds are currency, a knife is a legitimate wallet. And yet, the terrible thing about this story is not a knife or a cut. Creepy is the expanse in which a person has to make a choice, remaining small. The creepy thing is the whiteness that muffles the sound. And because of this, every word seems to be missing from the interlocutor. The terrible thing is the honesty of the space where there is no one to appeal to except those who are nearby and to yourself at the very last moment. This honesty is repulsive because you can't hide in it. But there is also dignity in it because it recognizes work and does not humiliate it with fairy tales. Sometimes they come to such places at night, on purpose. They stand on the slope in the very wind, close their eyes, and listen as long as their heart is enough. At first, only a whistling seam of air is heard. Then another sound emerges from the depths, soft, like fingers running over rough fabric. And in this sound, you can hear the answer to the question that people do not stop asking: who cut the tent? Those who needed to go out. Everything else is postscripts. And if you understand this, the fear becomes different. He stays, but stops demanding monsters. He finally accepts the scale of man. And this is the most terrible and honest thing. And this is the reason why this story lives longer than legends. The twilight finally settles, and there is suddenly something tender in its heaviness, as if the night, which has no pity, still knows how to cover. And perhaps this is the only grace it offers to all who have been here, who have come later, who will come later. It allows words to live to silence, and silence to the first crunch of the morning. And then the usual work will begin again, simple and huge: memory. It does not require the consent of the legend. It requires the attention of the living. And if this attention is held as the fire was held, carefully, not too high in the wind, but not allowed to be extinguished, then the main thing will remain in this story. A step, an open door in the fabric, a chain of footprints lower down, a fire by the cedar, the heartfelt crunch of the snow, and a light as soft as a palm at dawn, which promises nothing, but still comes. Sometimes it seems to me that this place has a very slow language, a language that is only spoken for years. He pronounces words so extensively that human hearing and patience do not hold them back. But if you strengthen the silence in yourself and try to listen, you can catch how this language slowly composes a story about simple movements. How to put skis under a tent so that the floor does not collapse. How to pull the rope so that the canopy does not flap. How to hang mittens on a stretch so that they freeze just enough to keep their shape, like clicking a knife in the dark, once briefly like a switch. And this is perhaps the most terrible motif of history. Everything in it is too earthly. It doesn't have someone else's step, it has its own steps, and they are too clearly visible. When the first daytime winds come, not night, predatorily even, but brittle with edges, the snow from above begins to tremble. It is barely noticeable to the eye, but it is audible to the movement, as if someone is sorting through glass beads in the palm of his hand. At the same time, old objects are more clearly read. Near the tent, there's a piece of narrow braid, on which the same ties are usually held. At the bottom of the cedar is the place where the bark was removed to get to the resin vein. To the side, on the line between the forest and the slope, there is a double trail where one walked next to the other, taking his breath for two. The picture does not ask for dramaturgy. It itself is made up of small tensions, like a seam at which each stitch holds the next one. Legends love shadows. They fill in the gaps between facts with them. But here the shadows are, first of all, the shadows of people for each other, a figure blocking the wind, a sleeve that covers other people's hands, a back on which, when it is very bad, you lie down to keep the rhythm. There is a single rhythm, SH step, SH step, SH step, and there is a common rhythm, the one that is heard not with the ears, but with the body. When the group, breaking up, still carries one invisible rope. It leads to the forest, to the fire, to the decision to return, to the fall to silence. And there is nothing supernatural about it. This is the human to the limit. Sometimes such places have the illusion that everything can be laid out by the minute. Here the knife went in, here the fabric gave way, here the first step, here the snow has melted away, here the fire has seized, here the branch has cracked. But the minutes in the night are not equal. One stretches like rubber in a dozen long seconds, and it is in it that they manage to do everything: cut the canopy, jump out, orient themselves. The other one shrinks like a spasm, and even a wave of the palm no longer fits into it, and therefore the shoes remain at the entrance, neatly as they were lying down. This is the special ethic of cold. It takes time exactly when it is needed, and gives it away when it is too late. And what we manage to do becomes the main thing. When the searchers begin to lay out the finds, someone will notice how strangely neat some things are. This neat has its own horror, as if someone tried to keep order even in a breakdown. On top of the tent, there is a flat pocket of snow, depressed, but not spaced. Below is a smooth crust, on which if you press your ear, you can hear a dull knock. Not alien, natural. Roots, frost, stone. Cedar has the remains of coals with a pungent smell of resin, which makes your throat sore even after years. In the ravine, there is a layered silence of snow. Upper, fresh. Below, old, grainy. Even lower are ice ledges that were once water. The layers don't argue. They just lie. We argue. And yet there is a detail in this story that scratches the heart more than the others every time. This is a line of footprints going down from the tent. Not even, but not chaotic either. It does not read panic, but a very fast collection. It's as if the darkness said time, and people did everything they were taught. Ease the interference. Choose a direction to the tree line. Stay close. Go down so that everyone can see the next. And then, already near the forest, the space of other solutions begins. Where's the fire? Where's the firewood? Who follows them? Who stays? Who is trying to come back? Who walks next to him? Because there is no other way to return. These decisions are the last minutes of warmth. And if you look closely at this thread, it becomes clear there was no place for an evil director here. It was a hard, honest choice here to the end. You could try to call fear by name, but the night does not recognize other people's names. It recognizes only the plane of the slope, the height of the crown, the depth of the ravine, the strength of the wind, the air temperature, and the speed of a person in these conditions. This is perhaps the most chilling thing. to understand that the terrible is not supernatural, but mathematically. That the mistake here is not someone, but how much. How quickly the weight of snow on the canopy has increased. How strong stretch marks are in this impulse. How close is the forest? As long as there is enough breath back and forth. How warm is the warmth that you can give to someone else? And how long silence can change shape while you are still able to hear it. Over the years, such places are encompassed by a soft showcase. So much is said above them that you begin to see them through words. But if, going around the window, you still go to the very slope and stand so that the wind beats on your cheek at the same angle, and so that you can see the hollow and the distant cedar and the line where the tent could stand, you suddenly discover a simple but wounding truth. This place remembers not a legend, but an effort. Every impulse in which the stand was held. Every step in which they chose between breathing and speed. Every minute by the fire, in which mittens were given to the neighbor without asking. This is his text, and it is terrible because of how much work there is in it and how little there is in the play. I often think about the hand that cut, about how everything came together in this movement. Experience, understanding of space, speed, responsibility for others. The knife, entering the fabric, did what it had to do, turn the shelter into an exit. It's not a symbol, it's a practice. Someone will say, but the way out did not save you. Maybe, but a way out is not a guarantee. It is a chance. And as long as the chance exists, it is more important than all subsequent interpretations. This honor is the quietest part of history, because after it there is already our noise, disputes, ideas, assumptions. And it was a pure, wordless work of heart and hands. And when the crust becomes hard again, and the wind settles down more comfortably, and it seems that the night is shifting, giving way to a gray morning, there's a feeling that the white plain for a second equalizes breathing with those who have been gone for a second. It is as if this slope, forest, ravine, cedar, fabric with a slit and coals below synchronously take one common breath. And in this breath, 9 very human, very earthly intentions are invisibly interwoven. To go, to warm, to return, to help, to look from above, to find, to convey, to hold, to be in time. And then everything diverges again. The wind, along its paths, silence, in its pockets, snow, in its layers. And people remain in memory. Memory is a stubborn thing. She will bring new ones here every time, not for a mystery, but for the very effort that sometimes we need more than a clue. To look at the slope, and honestly, they did everything they could hear. And this, strange as it may seem, is the most terrible and brightest outcome of history. Terrible because it leaves us alone with the truth about the limits. Light, because it reminds us that within any limits, we are left with a choice of door, fire, and step. Even if the door is an incision in the fabric. Even if fire is 3 greedy tongues in the wind. Even if the step is the last, it is to someone. When the day finally comes, it doesn't bring a clue, it brings form. Everything that happened at night acquires contours. An incision in the fabric becomes not a mystery, but an action. The tracks are not signs, but the road. A bonfire is not a symbol, but the work of hands. Those who have come to look for a long time stand in silence, because here you can clearly hear how silence draws conclusions instead of people. And there is nothing superfluous in these conclusions. The tent is cut from the inside to get out faster. Paths to the forest, to get to the fire. Reverse traces, to return warmth in things. Ravine, to understand how easily the earth turns a step into a fall. The rest is guesswork. They are cramped here. Later, when the slope is left alone again, the wind will sit on the same stones as that night and begin to slowly sort through the thin edges of the flooring, as if checking that everything is where it should be. In winter, it will erase traces to a perfect void. In spring, it will pull water from the depths so that it passes through the ground with a thin vein. And every time people come here with their versions, the slope will respond in the same way. It had no guests. There were 9 here. They did everything they could to be faster than the night. The night turned out to be faster. The most accurate thing in this story is simple things. A blade that found a seam of fabric in the dark. Hands that tore out the door where there was none. A back with which one covers the other from the wind. Branches broken high because they needed a view and firewood. A gesture by which a warm thing is taken off and placed on the shoulders of someone who is colder. These things do not explain everything, but they explain the main thing. Until recently, it was not legends who worked here, but people. Sometimes you want, like in a movie, to hear the final line, loud, placing accents at once. But this place has a different acoustics. Here the final words are short and almost silent. Let's go. Take it. Hold on. And perhaps somewhere at the very edge of dawn, another, the most difficult, it's time. It's time to cut the canvas. It's time to leave your things. It's time to choose a direction. It's time to recognize the limits. These words do not break the mystery. They give it a form in which you can breathe without myths. In the evening, the snow will begin to rustle again, like thin paper. For a moment, it seemed that the same line of tracks was coming from afar, 9 jagged lines stretching down to the forest. But it is only the wind that writes its ellipses on top of memory. Human memory is more stubborn. She would bring back names, faces, jokes at the bowler, a careful look at the racks and stretches, everything that was alive before the night. And while this return is possible, the story makes sense to exist without jewelry. Mountains rarely give answers, but they almost always leave instructions. Their laconic list does not contain loud items. Prepare the site, look at the slope, count the seconds, do not lose each other, share the heat, cut if you need to go out. These instructions do not always save. They do not have to. They only remind us that life in such places is always about the speed of decisions and about those for whom you make them. And this is the quiet, human truth of this story. When you leave here, your back catches how the wind seems to be looking after you. Not as an accuser, not as a judge, but as a guardian. He will not correct a single fact, will not add a single wonderful detail. He will only preserve the main thing, the tension of the second when the hand found the knife, the trajectory along which the fire breathed a little longer, a soft, almost weightless trail on the slope where the two walked side by side, and the way the silence changed shape while people still had the strength to respond to it. We like to ask, who cut the tent? As if everything else depends on the name. The answer here is simple to the point of dryness, and therefore the most terrible. It was cut by those who were inside, those who wanted to live. They made the door because the door was needed now, not later. They chose the path because the path is always a chance. They lit a fire because fire is always time. This turned out to be less than the night demanded. But it is enough that this story has not only cold logic, but also warm dignity. And therefore, the ending here is not a point but a nod. The slope turns white again, the forest darkens closer to the ground, and somewhere below the water flows like a thin vein. Those who come here tomorrow will hear the same glass rustle, and perhaps say in a low voice, they did everything they could hear. And this will be enough, Because sometimes the end of story is an admission of the simple. The fabric became the door, the night became the exit, and the snow became the memory. And the answer to the question with the preview is not in the legend or in the monster, but in the people, and in grief that remembers them without further ado.